We continue on our trek across AI with SweetSpeak. Today we're joined by Randy Bean. So Randy's a renowned advisor, author, and speaker with nearly 4 decades of experience guiding Fortune 1000 organizations in data and AI leadership. He's recognized for his deep expertise in driving data-driven innovation and transformation within some of the world's leading companies. You may know him from his book, his best-selling book, Fail Fast, Learn Faster, Lessons in Data-Driven Leadership in an Age of Disruption, Big Data, and AI. Randy's shared invaluable insights on navigating the challenges and opportunities of the modern data revolution. His thought leadership is regularly featured in Forbes, Harvard Business Review, and MIT Sloan Management Review, where he writes on the critical intersection of data, AI, and leadership. Through his work as a senior advisor, Randy continues to influence the field of data and AI, empowering organizations to embrace innovation, accelerate value creation, and lead with vision in an age of constant disruption. I'm excited to pick his brain, so when we come back, I sit down with Randy Bean. Randy, thank you so much for joining us.
JD, it's a delight and a pleasure to be here.
So I want to dive in first and talk about origins here, if you will. You spent nearly 4 decades advising Fortune 1000 companies on data and AI. What originally drew you to this field, and how has your perspective evolved over the years?
Yeah, thanks for asking and thanks for having me. I didn't study computer science or anything of that kind when I was in school. I was actually a English major, which is maybe why I do some writing these days. But, I was also pragmatic and I wanted a job. And I decided I wanted to go work for a major bank. So in that case, living in Boston, at the time it was Bank of Boston. It's now part of Bank of America. It was founded in 1784, et cetera, and a top 10 bank. And the jobs at that time were either to be a commercial lender, this was like 45 years ago, either to be a commercial lender or to be trained in this new thing they called a systems intern. And a systems intern meant that they trained you to be a COBOL and assembler programmer. To be a commercial lender at Bank of Boston, I mentioned 1784, so it was kind of stodgy old New England. You had to be able to produce a certificate that showed that you came directly from the Mayflower, which I couldn't find. I went through my drawers, couldn't find that. So I went the route where I was trained as a COBOL and assembler programmer. But I was much more interested in the stuff that you moved around. I was less interested in the programming. I was interested in the data, if you will. And at that time, I went to the leadership of the organization. I said, what do you do with all this rich information you capture in your customers, their history, their preferences, what they've done over the years? And the answer I've got was that the regulators make us hold on to it for 7 years and then we can destroy it. Okay. And I was like, wow. What a missed opportunity. And that really embarked me on what I've been doing for the past 4.5 decades, which is educating organizations on the power of data, how data can be used to more effectively acquire customers, retain them, treat them in a better fashion, how it can be used to manage your business more effectively, more efficiently, grow your business. So that's really the origins of how I came to be involved with data. And I should say that, when I was trained as a COBOL and assembler programmer, who knew at the time that data and technology would be the centerpiece of our economy and our culture over the next 50 years. So I just happened to arrive at the right place at the right time. And it's been a journey ever since then, and there's been many evolutions, but it's been exciting to be a part of it.
So let's look over the next year, Randy. How do you see the role of data leaders evolving in this next year, especially with the growing intersection of AI into business processes?
That's a subject that I can and do speak to audiences all the time. So I could literally speak for hours on that subject. And there's a survey that I conduct every year and just completed that survey, so I can share some data from that. So I'll just give you a couple of data points. The chief data officer role was largely established in response to the financial services crisis of 2008, 2009, particularly within major banks. But even a few years after that, by 2012, only 12% of the Fortune 1000 companies that I survey had appointed a chief data officer This year, it's 84.3%. So the role is pretty ubiquitous, okay? But at the same time, when we ask whether the role's been successful, the rough numbers are, 47% say that the role is successful and well established, and the other 53% say that organizations are struggling with the role. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. It's a relatively new role, only 15 plus years old, and that's early or nascent in the long-term picture. There was a joke a generation ago that when the first CIO role was first established, that CIO stood for career is over, because there was no blueprint and a lot of change and so forth. And I tell that joke from time to time because, people respond to it. But I told it I was in London 2 weeks ago for the Data IQ, Data and A leadership conference that they have. And I mentioned that joke about CIO being career is over, and somebody raised their hand, and I said, yes, what is it? And they said, well, you know what CDO stands for? And I said, I don't. And they said, well, it stands for career is definitely over. Okay. So I've written a lot about the challenges that chief data officers face, that organizations face. I wrote a piece in Harvard Business Review last year on the topic, why the CDO is set up to fail. I wrote a piece a few months ago on our chief data officers in big trouble. So the point is really this: the demand for data and AI leadership is only going to increase. So that's the good news. But what shape and form it takes remains to be seen. In the survey this year, we asked whether organizations had appointed a chief AI officer or the equivalent, and I was actually astonished that 32% of organizations said that they had. That was remarkable to me. I didn't realize that it would be that high. And then one final point here. A year ago at this time, in December of 2023, I participated in this event at Northeastern University, their Center for Responsible AI. And the first day was billed as the 10th Annual Chief Data Officer Summit. And the second day was billed as the first ever Chief AI Officer Summit. And I did a keynote panel for the first day. But there was a difference in mood between the 2 days. So the first day was a lot of grumbling about, we're not respected, here's the challenges we face, business leaders aren't listening to us, etc. And the second day was all blue sky and green fields, like, oh, we're going to have a remarkable AI future. And I turned to the chief data officers and I said, the solution to your challenges is very simple. You just call yourself a chief AI officer, and it'll be 3 years until somebody starts questioning the value that you bring. So, there's a lot of enthusiasm about AI and the AI leadership role. And I guess the bottom line point is that these roles are evolving really rapidly. So what it looks like over the next 2, 3, or 5 years remains to be seen, whether the chief data officer role is a part of the C-suite, whether the chief data officer transforms into something else. That's all a work in progress. So I could talk for hours on this, but I'll stop for now.
It's constantly evolved, right? Because you had the CTO, the CIO, all of a sudden here comes the CISO that's part of this now, the CAIO, and others. It's going to continue to evolve. And speaking of evolution, in your book Fail Fast, Learn Faster, you emphasize learning from failures. So what lessons from the past 2 decades should data leaders carry forward as they navigate AI going in the next few years?
Well, I think a chief data officer, whether people like it or not, it's fundamentally a change agent. So it's a transformational role. So it's a role where you're bringing some level of discomfort to an organization to get it to a place that it isn't presently. If you look at the numbers, 90% of Fortune 1000 companies are greater than a generation old, which basically makes them legacy companies. And the 90% of the Fortune 1000, they don't have to compete against the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebook. They just have to compete against the other 90%. So it means that the pace of evolution tends to be gradual and evolutionary. And as a case in point, during the pandemic a few years ago, I was speaking to the chief digital and data officer for a major insurance company. And he said to me, we've done more to execute on our digital strategy in the past 6 months than we did in the previous 20 years. And the point there is that organizations don't really need to do something, and often they don't do something until it's at that stage where it's existential. In other words, during the pandemic, if you didn't find a different way to interact with your customers, potentially you'd lose them. So Most AI work that companies are doing now is in an early stage in experimentation. That's a question we ask each year in terms of where organizations are with their AI initiatives. Last year, only 5% had AI capabilities in production at scale. The other 95% were in experimentation. This year, it's roughly 20 to 24% that have AI in production, but it's only a quarter of organizations. So back to your question, fail fast, learn faster. The idea there is don't wait around for things to happen. Try things, experiment, test and learn from experience, learn from failure. Over many years, I ran a P&L going back 30 years or so. And one of the things that I learned early on was I was judged each year based upon the annual number that I hit at the end of the year. So I adopted this philosophy that once I knew how to make my number, I said to myself, for the first quarter of every year, I will try 10 new things. And if one of those things succeeds, it's something that I've learned new. And it was my experience that usually 9 out of those 10 things failed. But it was my period of being able to try things and learn and test and learn, because I knew that for the other 3 quarters, I could then catch up and make my number. So sometimes people don't have that luxury, but that's really the message of the book, learning from experience, because often failure makes us better, stronger, smarter. So that's the takeaway.
There's a huge challenge always for data leaders between speed and strategy, right? So as AI accelerates decision making, how can data leaders strike the right balance between moving fast and maintaining strategic oversight?
Well, that's very funny, because the original Facebook, what was their slogan? Move fast and break things. But that doesn't work when you're a Fortune 1000 company that's a legacy company and heavily regulated. The last thing you want to do is break things. And that's why it's really incumbent for legacy companies to establish responsible AI standards, safeguards and guardrails, so that they don't mess things up, so they don't threaten their customer franchise. The last thing in the world that you want to do is destroy something that you've spent 100 to 200 years creating. So at the same time that there's tremendous gains to be made from implementing AI within organizations need to be very cautious, thoughtful. They have to have a deliberate plan about doing that, and they have to be very mindful about the safeguards and guardrails so that they make sure that they get it right.
Let's talk navigating disruption. In an era defined by constant disruption, what advice would you have for leaders to stay ahead of the curve without being overwhelmed by change? Even when you look at AI, Randy, there's a new AI company every 3 hours launched, right? So how do you not become overwhelmed by this change?
I love that question because there's really 3 things that I consider the things that I bring some level of expertise. In other words, if somebody asks me a data mesh versus a data fabric, I'm like, I don't know. But one is, data and AI leadership. The other is delivering business value. And the third is transformation and change, and how organizations need to approach that. So early on in my career, I had a mentor who was vice chairman of the bank that I mentioned. And he said to me, Randy, you got to understand, he says, nothing in this industry ever happens quicker than a decade. And at the time I thought, like, wow, that's really a cynical point of view, grumpy old guy, this type of thing. But my experience over the ensuing decades has been that that's the rule more often than not. And I cited the example about the digital transformation, started in 99, 2000. And of course, the Googles and the Amazons were off to the races. But for most mainstream companies, it played out over the ensuing decade, 2 decades, and particularly accelerated during the pandemic. So transformation takes time. The biggest thing that I urge organizations, and it's maybe a benefit that comes along, the only benefit that comes along with when you get old, is that you get perspective. Sometimes you can see things, it's almost like a crystal ball, because you've seen so many cycles in the past, you've seen so many patterns. So you've said, this is like this. And so, people tend to be consumed by the shiny object or the latest thing, but you really, because historically most of my customers were Fortune 1000 companies and they moved at a more gradual pace. When people said, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? I just like, I didn't react to it. And I said, I don't really pay attention. The light doesn't really go on until I've heard organizations mentioning it 10 or 20 times, because then it seems it's reached a critical mass that it's something to seriously think about. And I found that that's held true in terms of organizational adoption. So a lot of things will fly by one's attention span. But it's really when it starts to get that critical mass of attention that you say, what is this? What does it mean? How can it potentially transform our organization? What are the benefits? What are the risks? And how do we develop a plan, an executable plan? So over time, over 3 to 5 years, a 3 to 5 year plan is good because it doesn't mean you're stuck in that 3 to 5 year plan. You can change that all the time. Somebody said to me, I was working with an organization about 10 or 15 years ago, they said, they're really messed up. They change their data strategy every year. I said, that's not messed up. I said, that's like really smart. What they're doing is they're adapting it to the latest information. So, organizations should develop a long-term plan, but they should continue to adapt that and revisit it on a regular basis.
Talk to me about the relationship between data and AI, how that's evolved, and what should leaders prioritize to ensure their AI strategies are firmly grounded in high quality data?
Well, it's both simple and complex. The simple part is that great AI is completely dependent upon great data. Okay, so data is the foundation for any type of AI initiatives. And at the same time, in the survey that conducted this year, we asked organizations whether attention to AI has fueled new interest and new investment in data. And, it'd take me a few minutes to find the answer to that, but it was roughly 90% or more of organizations that said there's been much more renewed interest in data and investment in data for these reasons. At the same time, data quality is never easy. It's a challenge. Organizations continue to struggle with it. So the stuff that lies under the waterline, if you will, in terms of getting the data in a shape that organizations can use it and can get full value of their AI, that remains, a challenge for organizations. But there's a lot of new capabilities coming on board that organizations can take advantage of. These things will play out over time.
We can dive into technology all the time, but one thing that's not really talked about too much when we're talking about data and AI is culture. What do you think are the biggest challenges organizations face in fostering a culture that embraces both data and AI? And how can these leaders overcome these barriers?
Yeah, one of the questions that asked in the survey, which is one of my favorite questions to talk about, is we ask, and it's kind of a yes or no question. We give two choices. We say, what is the greatest barrier to success with your data and AI initiatives? And one answer is culture, so change management, process change, people, etc. And then the second one is technology. And every year the answer, roughly 90%, is culture and people. Okay. So there's abundant technology, there's plenty of technology there, but basically in incorporating new technology involves change and transformation are never easy. And even when organizations pay lip service to change, what happens is, everybody's all for change when it's somebody else or their organization, but it's when it's like, you're the one that has to change, then it's like, well, there's people are less receptive to that. So it's just something that organizations have to recognize, and they have to recognize the culture of their organization. I was telling the story earlier this week where I went into an organization about 6 years ago, and it was a regional bank, very slow to change, and I'd been dealing with them for years. I remember at the time that, and this was about 20 years ago, they talked about they wanted to accelerate their digital strategy. And I had with me a person that had run digital strategy for a major bank. And I said, okay, so what type of organization do you have in place? And they said, well, you're looking at it, me and this person. And we laughed. And I said, well, my colleague here in his digital transformation organization, they had 2,000 people. So that signaled the level of commitment and the cultural willingness of the organization to transform. And this organization was trying to do it with, two and a half people. So a few years ago, I went into that same organization. They'd hired a new chief data officer, and I met with the chief data officer for an hour. And for the first, so he's describing all of the ways that he's going to transform the organization. He had great energy, great enthusiasm, highly intelligent. So for the first 20, 25 minutes, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. This is really transformational. This is really exciting. And he kept on going. And now I'm starting to get tired of saying so I went from enthusiastic to skeptical to, in his last 20 minutes, I'm thinking yeah, he's never going to get this done. And that basically what happened within the organization. In the first 6 months, he had, 300 people showing up for his meetings, and people were like, wow, we're so excited. In the next 6 months, it had dropped to about 100 people. And, people were like, this has potential. And, after that, it dropped to, you'd get 5 to 10 people attending the meetings and so forth. And the writing was on the wall. It was more than the organization was prepared to adopt because of the culture. So you really have to judge your organization in terms of their readiness and their willingness. I used to have a test when I went into organizations. I called it the readiness test, and people said, readiness? What does that mean? And I said, I can tell pretty quickly whether an organization is receptive to change or they're not. When you go in and they're sitting there like this, so tell me what you do. And, that's one sign to begin with, the body language that says it. But the best organizations, I think of Capital One, they're an organization that's been hugely transformational in financial services. Every time I ever met with them, they said, what are other people doing? What are the startups doing? What are people investing in? We're worried, we're worried that, we're not encompassing all of the latest capabilities and technologies. So from my experience, the truly transformational companies are always worried about their position. They're always thinking about how they can be better, and they're never satisfied. And the companies that say, we got it all figured out, those are the ones that you have to worry about.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's shift to responsible AI, right? Because that's an increasing concern for data leaders, and especially in those regulated industries as well. So with the increasing concerns around AI ethics and bias, what proactive steps should data leaders take to ensure responsible AI implementation into their organizations?
Yeah, I'll share some data with you. Responsible AI was one of the focus of the survey this year. We asked, is investment in responsible AI a top corporate priority? 73.5% said yes. Probably should be 100%, but what can you say? We asked, are responsible AI safeguards and guardrails in place, or should they be in place? So 97.5% said they should be in place. Again, the 2.5%, I don't know what they're thinking. And then we asked, are they in place today? And 77% said they were. Last year it was only 62%. So there's been progress in that regard. Responsible AI is critical. More and more organizations are focusing on it. If you don't have the safeguards and guardrails, the potential risks that you're placing on your franchise are enormous and potentially existential. So better to be safe than sorry. And again, because the other 90% are not like Google and Meta and Amazon, that you got to remember that's who you're competing with.
Let's talk skill set then, because you're not learning this in college right now, right? Because it is constantly evolving. So talk to me, what skills will be the most critical for data leaders in their teams in the next year and beyond? And how should organizations approach talent development to stay competitive?
That's a simple and easy question for me, but might not be what everybody want to hear. It's being able to deliver business value. It's being able to communicate with the business, make sure you're focusing on a business problem, answering business questions, and more chief data officers or data leaders are coming from business backgrounds. For example, I spoke about Capital One. Their new chief data officer, new being about a year and a half, before accepting the chief data officer role, she was president of Capital One UK for 5 years. So she ran the business end to end for one of the major geographic markets of the company. Visa, their chief data, they just hired a brand new one, but their former chief data officer, I had known him for many years because he was a line of business executive. He led retail banking for Fleet Bank, and then he led personal investing for Fidelity Investments for a number of years. And it was about 2 years ago, I got a call from him. And he said, "Randy, guess what? I've just been named Chief Data Officer at Visa, and you know as well as I do that I know absolutely nothing about data, but you know that I know how to run the business, and that I'll find the people that are the subject matter experts." And to your point, I think that's why many organizations have struggled with the chief data officer role, because in the early years or mid-years, a number of people that they elevated to those roles were subject matter experts and didn't have that understanding of the business, and therefore couldn't speak the language of the business leaders. So I think chief data officers over time are becoming more adept at speaking the business language, and coming from that background, I think, is the critical success factor.
Every organization wants to be that AI-driven customer experience organization. It's hard to get there. How can AI transform customer experience strategies, and what role should data leaders play in ensuring AI aligns with customer-centric goals?
Somebody said to me recently, and I'm still digesting it because so much of the discussion around AI, you learn something every week. And they said to me a few weeks ago, they said, AI leadership, we're focused on the applications, the end business applications, and the data leaders should focus on making sure that we have the quality data so that we're not worrying about that. We're focused on the applications. So, I guess in answer to your question, I think it's evolving, and in some organizations now, for example, I mentioned Capital One, the chief AI officer is a peer of the chief data officer. I wrote an article in September on Cleveland Clinic. They had just hired their first chief AI officer, who was a peer of the chief data officer. But then in October, I wrote an article about USAA, who had written about it several times in the past, and was speaking to their chief data officer and said, "So do you have a separate person to lead AI within the organization?" He said, "Absolutely not. That responsibility lies with me." So, there's a dichotomy of opinion, those who believe that it's a separate role focused more on the applications, and some who believe that it should be part of the chief data officer mandate. So these days, you have chief data officers, chief data and analytics officers. Some organizations now chief data analytics and AI officers, and some have the separate chief AI officers. So it's an evolving series of roles.
We talked about individuals. We talked about the CIO, the CAIO. Let's talk about teams and building resilient teams. It's crucial in this AI era. What characteristics define resilient teams, and how can leaders build them in their organizations today?
That's a good question. It's a question that I don't hear that often. But one of the questions I'd ask in the survey is, we ask whether talent is in place to implement AI, and it's roughly half the organizations say yes, and half of the organizations say that it isn't. So I think that's one of the challenges that organizations face in terms of building teams, is whether they have the right talent to be able to sufficiently leverage new and emerging AI technologies. And I think that it's something that organizations are struggling with. And, I think it will get better over the coming years. In part, it's generational thing in terms of, I had a doctor's exam the other day for, I'd had some knee surgery, a knee replacement. And they installed this new electronic system, but when we're going through things, they ask, what medications are you on, etc. And my wife said, well, all of that's on the system. And they say, no, the doctor wants everything on paper. Okay. So the point is that, even as technology make things capable, there's, a lot of people at all levels of organizations and all levels of their career that are comfortable doing things a certain way, and will continue to do things until it becomes very self-evident and easy to adopt the new technologies.
I want to find out what you have going on. But before we do, last question for you. As we look ahead, what excites you most about the future of AI for data leaders, and what scares the pants off of you at the same time?
I think that in industries like healthcare and the life sciences, the potential impact and potential benefits can be exponential and life-changing, no pun intended. I think in areas like social media, the risks of misinformation and disinformation are extraordinary. A year ago, well, actually this year, but 2 years ago, the past 2 years, I've gone to the Wall Street Journal Tech Live event, an event that's held in Laguna Beach for a fairly small audience. And last year, interestingly enough, they had Sam Altman as the keynote speaker, and they focused in with him on artificial general intelligence, not Gen AI, but the next thing. And they said to him, please define artificial general intelligence. And he said, that's when a machine can do any cognitive task better than a human being. I said, okay. And they said, so when's that going to become available that people can start availing themselves of that in some context? And he said, well, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have said in the next decade. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said in the next 5 years. If you asked me 6 months ago, I would have said, in the next 1 to 2 years. If you're asking me tonight, I have to go back in the lab. And now, he said this 2 years ago now. So, a lot of these capabilities are coming along so rapidly that, we're part of information revolution, but that revolution will manifest itself in at an evolutionary pace for most organizations. I mean, I think there's a lot of analogies looking back at the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century. It played out over a full century, but there were things such as railroads, electricity, and other inventions that completely transformed how people lived and worked and operated.
You're sought after for your advice, and I want to thank you for taking your time here. What do you have going on? I know you're constantly writing for Forbes, for the Harvard Business Review, speaking all over the place. What do you have kicking right now, Randy?
Well, JD, I had a company that I ran for 20 years, a boutique management consulting firm, worked with Fortune 1000 companies, counseling them on data strategy and how to implement that at the C levels. And I sold that in December of 2021, completed the integration December of 2023. So I, quote unquote, semi-retired. So these days I'm staying engaged because, if you take your foot off the pedal, you kind of lose it all in terms of staying engaged. So I continue to do a lot of writing, speaking. I mentioned I did a keynote in London 2 weeks ago, a keynote in Peru for CDO LATAM in September. I continue to put together a series of chief data officer panels for MIT, CDO IQ, and other groups. I put together a CDO dinner in New York a week ago for Iconic Capital. And then the last thing, I'm serving on advisors and boards. So I'm an advisor to Iconic Capital, the venture and investment firm. I'm also working with GAI Insights, which is a company out of Boston, and former couple Harvard Business School professors, and their aspiration is to be the Gartner of generative AI. Things of that kind. I have about a half dozen of those advisor board roles.
That keeps you busy, that's for sure. Randy, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us here today. Thank you once again to Randy. Always a great conversation. If you want to listen to past episodes of Sweet Speak, You can get them wherever you get your podcasts or at jamesdewayne.com. That's DWAYNE.com. Also, reach out to us on jamesdewayne.com if you're interested in attending or sponsoring one of our Sweet Speak dinners, where we dive into these types of conversations and oh so much more. You can find that at jamesdewayne.com.